Hello and welcome back, or if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to Restoration Movement Conversations. I'm your host, Mark Nichols, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Josh Stuckey and Jamie Frankie. And we are so glad that you are here with us. And today, the topic that we're really going to try to cover and talk about today, it might on the surface kind of seem like it's geared towards preachers, which maybe it is, but maybe if you're tuning in here today and you're interested in the topic, maybe this will help give you a little bit of a behind the scenes to what it is that we as preachers struggle with the most. And what is it that we struggle with the most is in regards to sermon preparation? It's the holidays. And so that's what we want to talk about is really how to stay fresh for the holidays. And I'm talking from Christmas and Resurrection Sunday, but also Thanksgiving and Mother's Day and Father's Day and Memorial Day, and the list goes on and on. How do we stay fresh for these? And so we're going to explore 5 questions today that we hope to answer, and going to get some insight from both Jamie and from Josh and myself. And if you're a preacher who struggles with the holidays, then you came to the right place. But if maybe you're a congregational member and you can't figure out why your preacher won't preach on certain holidays, maybe this will give you a little bit of an insight as to why that is, and maybe you can offer some grace to extend to your preacher in that regard too. So let's dive into it here today, and let's ask this first question. What holidays do you specifically include in your preaching schedule? As a preacher, we are all the time trying to come up with a preaching schedule for maybe the entire year at a time, or maybe 6 months at a time. And in that preparation, what holidays do you specifically include? And I just want to pose this question and offer it up first to my co-hosts. And Josh, why don't you just talk a little bit about this, and you can even elaborate on maybe some of the struggles that you have personally with the holidays.
All right. Well, there's 4 holidays I always preach on. And the 2 big ones, of course, Christmas and Resurrection Sunday, also known as Easter. And then the other 2 that I always do is Mother's Day and Veterans Day. Yet, even with only 4 a year, the struggle with holiday sermons is, of course, how to be original, because it's, the same holiday every year, and you don't want to preach the same message. You don't want to be lazy, and you also still want to deliver something that's impactful. And the other struggle, I would say, is not just originality, but it also breaks up a sermon series. So if you're going through a Bible book, or you are brave enough, maybe foolish enough to have a topical sermon series, then a holiday always breaks that up.
Mhm.
And that can be detrimental to trying to instruct your congregation in the Bible. So I'd say those are my 2 major struggles.
Okay. Jamie?
Yeah, I think that there are 2 holidays that I always preach on, or the subject of the holidays, and those are Christmas and Resurrection Sunday. And I've done sermons pertaining to Mother's Day and Father's Day, and series relating to those, like family series, that kind of thing. But I've really, in more recent years, have elected to not try to schedule preaching around those holidays, except I always do something for Christmas, oftentimes a series leading up to Christmas, or I have often, and often a series leading up to Resurrection Sunday as well. And so that's been my approach. I would say maybe a little bit of a counter to what Josh said. He rightly brought up that holidays can interrupt series, and that can be a difficulty, that's for sure. At the same time, in more recent years, I've found that they can also be a bit of a help. So if you preach, say, through the book of Romans, and you preach, verse by verse all the way through that book, you'll be in it for, I think I had around 50 sermons out of Romans when I went through it. But that sermon series got broken up occasionally, partly just because of Christmas and Easter. And so sometimes that can be good if, like, you preach part of a book, maybe especially if it's a section of a book and then you have it broken up, then you come back to it. That can be a positive, I think, or at least I found it to be such. Probably the most difficult holiday, though, to me would be Christmas. And that's maybe just, I think, just because of the extra stuff. We always have a Christmas candlelight service. We do it the Sunday evening before Christmas, but that's a whole service that, speaking of originality and how you approach that in a fresh way. So not only are you thinking sermon series, but you're thinking of other kinds of things that might be happening as well, that can just make it challenging, because you do want to bring something that matters, that's fresh, that speaks God's word in a clear way every year.
Yeah. Oh man. That's interesting that you preached, how many weeks did you say? Roughly 50 weeks on the book of
I
Romans?
Yeah, I think it was something to that effect. I can't remember now exactly the number, but
That's great.
it was several sermons. But
Yeah. But I could see where in that sense, then definitely, preaching on a holiday might be a welcome break for not only you, but also the church may be there as well. So, yeah. Well, let me just answer my own question here a little bit. For me, first of all, let me preface it. Being at a church for 25 years, believe me, I think I've preached on every holiday that there might be other than Halloween. Maybe I've even preached a Halloween, what about Halloween, the do's and don'ts of it. But I think I've preached on every single holiday at least at some point or another. But as far as scheduling goes, there's only two holidays that I religiously and faithfully preach on, or will stop what I'm doing and acknowledge these two holidays. And it's absolutely, like Jamie just said, Christmas and Easter really are the two. But as far as getting excited for a holiday, can we all agree that I think Easter's the easiest to get excited for? Resurrection Sunday. And the reason might seem a little superficial, but it's probably because it's not only going to be your most well-attended holiday, and you're going to have first-time guests, so you're automatically, jazzed up to maybe preach to a larger crowd that Sunday than you might otherwise get to preach to. But I also think it's because it's the pinnacle, it's the climatic point of Christ's ministry, right? And so that's really, really good. Christmas is one that I struggle with the most. And it is just because it's the one that I choose to go to year after year after year after year. And how do I preach about angels, and how do I preach about wise men again, and all of those things. So I think those are probably my two biggest challenges in preaching about Christmas.
so before we go on, Josh mentioned that he preaches always Veterans Day and Mother's Day. Why those two, Josh,
Good question.
that you do?
Well, I think that even here in the Midwest, all of us are in the Midwest, but even inside of the Midwest, there are subcultures.
Mhm.
And some churches are going to view certain things and certain holidays more important than others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And two that are just a really big deal here in Callio are Mother's Day, because we always have a Mother's Day breakfast. We always give away flowers. Like, the whole day is themed around it. So it'd be very strange to do all the fanfare and then have a sermon on Romans chapter 2. It just doesn't fit, Now, Father's Day, one reason I get away with it is because men just don't care,
Yeah.
So that's just, and so I don't usually do a Father's Day
Josh,
sermon.
let me ask you this in regards to your Mother's Day. So you've been at Callio 14?
This is my 15th year.
15th year. So 15, now a little honesty here. Have you ever reused a Mother's Day sermon?
Well, I have reused a Christmas sermon.
Christmas sermon. Yeah.
I have not.
agree.
I find Mother's Day to be easier than Christmas.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's because there's so many different stories about mothers in the Bible.
Mothers and women.
It's pretty easy to get something original.
Yeah.
So that's less of a struggle than Christmas or Resurrection Sunday. But as far as Veterans Day, we have a Veterans Day presentation, and it's like 15 minutes long, and it's a big deal. And again, it just wouldn't fit the fanfare of the day to preach something random with that. The whole day is focused on it, and we kind of combine Veterans Day and Memorial Day in those celebrations. So it's only fitting there's a message that speaks to that. That one's a fairly hard one to do because it's kind of like Christmas and Resurrection Sunday, where there's just really one theme and there's limited scripture on the subject. But again, it's one of those things that's sacred here, and so I just maintain it.
Yep. And that's knowing your audience, right? Jamie,
Yeah.
you guys at least, I assume we're probably on the same page. I assume you guys acknowledge mothers on Mother's Day or
Oh,
have some
yeah.
sort of celebration.
Yeah. We always do. It's been a tradition all the years since before I came to give the mothers a gift and the fathers a gift. And, if I'm preaching on something totally different, I'll usually make sure and acknowledge Mother's Day or Father's Day or it's acknowledged somewhere, but it just isn't the focal point often hasn't been the focal point of the sermon, at least for
Yeah. Let me just say this to any young preachers that are watching this. Acknowledge mothers for Mother's Day. You don't have to preach, but you acknowledge mothers for Mother's Day, okay? That's some free advice for all of our young preachers that are watching.
And actually, the older that I've gotten, I'm 50 years old now, the more that we acknowledge and uphold the the biblical model of family, motherhood and fatherhood, our culture so desperately needs that. And so it's
Oh,
a good thing.
you are right. Well, here's the second question that I want to address. What resources do you guys recommend for a young preacher or maybe a seasoned preacher who is struggling to prepare or come up with maybe a Christmas or Resurrection Sunday / Easter sermon? What resources would you recommend?
Which one of us is first?
Sorry, let's go with Jamie.
Okay.
All right. Well, I wish I had just a list of resources to give, but I don't. I do subscribe to a couple of preaching things online, but really haven't used those a lot for holiday coming at Christmas a fresh way, for example. But one thing that I have found has been so enjoyable for me, and I think this could be replicated by preachers, and that is that not this past year, but previous couple years to it, my oldest son and my oldest son's name is Walker, and he's a preacher, and we collaborated on a series that was around Resurrection Sunday leading up to it. Now, we would meet online via like Google Meet and kind of plan out the series. We'd plan out the sermons, and we would even work to get the take-home truth or main idea of the sermon and maybe an outline. And we would each prepare sermons that were for the churches where we preached at. But what I found to be so enjoyable about that, beyond just working with my son, it was very, very enjoyable in that respect, but was just capitalizing on what somebody else can bring to the brainstorming and part of it. And he's more creative than I am. And so that was just really, really good. And I could see, especially in our world today with Google Meet and ways of meeting online, preachers could do that well. If you had
Mhm.
2 or 3 or 4 preachers, especially if you think kind of similar, that's really important. But just kind of work on some sermon series kind of things and bounce ideas off each other. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you need to prepare sermons that are for your respected locations,
Right.
but you can do a lot of work, and especially approaching a holiday sermon series in a fresh way just by collaborating a little bit together. So
Yeah.
that would be my recommendation, or at least something that's worked for me.
Anything to add to that, Josh?
Well, a couple of things I would say is there's a few resources that I would not use.
Hmm.
For example, holiday sermons are challenging. You've heard every one of us say that. And I don't think there's a preacher out there who would disagree with it. Yet, this is still not the time to go to sermoncentral.com or AI and just have them write it for you. That is, let me tell you why. Because within 2 minutes, your entire congregation's going to know you didn't write that sermon.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you, they're going to know.
Yep.
And you might think you're going to get away with it. You might think it's not a big deal. But here's the deal. There's a couple of problems with this. Not only is it wrong, it's lazy, and it is not what they have expected from you. But also, now this may sound a little poetic or even weird, but the moment you decide to do that one time, if you by chance get away with it, you know what you're going to do next time.
Mm-hmm.
Do
It's the
not
shortcut.
even
It's
start.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
don't
listen,
even start.
and those of you who do this, please stop doing it because it gives the rest of us a bad name. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I
Now at
couldn't
the
agree more.
same time, I'm not saying you can't get ideas from those sources. That's fine.
Right.
But the script of your sermon, the outline of your sermon must be your own.
Yep.
It must be.
Well,
I had
and a sermon is so personal, right, guys?
Yes.
I mean, it's what you really, literally, almost kind of give birth to. You've worked at it. So it just doesn't make. You're exactly right. They're going to know if you're just simply reading somebody else's thoughts right off a page.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that is I had a preacher boy who, just for preacher boy class, he was asked to preach at a church, and he had already preached all his sermons at this church. And instead of asking me for help, instead of, anything else, he just decided to go to AI and print off a sermon. Thankfully, I just thought to ask him before he went to look at it, and I knew immediately he had not written it. In fact, I said, I want you to just read the first paragraph to me. And he couldn't even do it because the words were too big for him. And I told him, look, you're young. I understand that you haven't been told not to do this, or at least maybe you haven't. But you would have not only hurt your own reputation, you would have hurt the Preacher Boy program reputation.
Yeah.
You would have looked like a fool, and you would have made our program look like a fool. So, guys, Sermon Central and AI and all that stuff, I'm not saying they don't have their place properly calibrated, but your script and your outline must be your own.
Right. And I'll just add that thought to it as well, that definitely what beg, borrow, politely steal, but get permission. But from your friends, we all have got colleagues who are in ministry. You reach out
Yes.
to them and just say, hey, can you help me? One other source that I have personally used is called the Skit Guys. Holiday, I think you can go to theskitguys.com. For $99, they have packaged and they put it out every single year. Christmas, Easter Sunday. I mean, all of these different holiday packages with sermon outlines, PowerPoint graphics, logos for the sermon series. And even I believe they offer a written script that if you wanted to incorporate a drama team to do that, they would have a script and a drama to introduce or to act it out a little bit. But obviously it's a smorgasbord program. You pick and choose, figure out what works for you. I have never, even with the sermons that they offer, full manuscript and outline sermons, I have never, ever been able to, nor would I think I have the desire to, get up and preach it verbatim out of, you have to, you got to make it your own. You got to make it flow naturally with what the words you use and change the outline. Plus, keep this in mind. Some of the sources that you may use online might be faith only, and you might get some Calvinistic teaching scattered in there. And if you're not, able to distinguish or decipher that, you're going to become a false teacher. So,
and let me add something about AI there. AI will combine Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Seventh-day Adventism, Calvinism, and Satanism in the same sermon.
Yeah, I believe it.
It has no religious bias except a general religious bias.
I believe it.
So, again, do not do that.
And that's probably the foremost reason not to depend upon those things is not just the damage you do to yourself, but to others that you're preaching to is so significant with that. I think of what's a First Timothy 4:16. Pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. Persevere in these things, for as you do this, you will ensure salvation both for yourself and for those who hear you. And how important that is. Of all the problems, I think that would land on the most serious one. If you start depending on those things and you all of a sudden you're losing out on, is this even biblical or not, and poor assessment of that, and very dangerous.
Absolutely. Good. Yep. Good points. Thank you, guys. Question number 3. And it's really more of just kind of a help. This is where we get to the practical side of it. Can you each think of maybe an example of one of your favorite holiday sermon series that you've preached, or even maybe a favorite holiday sermon that you've preached in some way that you felt like was creative or unique, or that was well received, that just might be able to be used as a tool for somebody who's tuning in, be like, that's a good idea. I'm going to make that one my own.
And
Go ahead.
I would even say, we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I know for my part, when I share one, if you email us at Restoration Movement Conversations at MidwestMinistryTraining.com, I'd be happy to share with you
Yeah.
the examples that I would give, at least.
Same here. I'd be happy as well. Be happy to. PowerPoints, whatever I can help with. I'm happy to.
I freely distribute anything I've ever written to anybody who asks.
But with that being said, Josh, let's turn to you first on that. What's been your favorite? Or if
When
you
you
do
asked
have
me, when you asked that question, I was very
Yeah.
tempted to say I have nothing.
I have no favorite.
But the truth is, I've written a lot of them. I have a lot of them. I think my favorite one wasn't so much like a holiday sermon specifically, but preaching through the different feasts and festivals of the Old Testament
Sure.
was kind of fun
Interesting.
because it shows you that God is a God of memorials, and he did have holidays that were mandated, and there were reasons for them, and there's
Yeah.
types and shadows that spill over into the New Testament. So that
Good
was
idea.
interesting. I would say that
Mhm.
was
That's
that's my
good.
answer.
Okay. Jamie?
Yeah, a couple of series that I thought about just in regard to favorites that I've done. One was a Christmas series, and it was called The Gifts of Christmas, and it was a 4-part series. One was on the gift of love, the gift of joy, the gift of peace, and the gift of hope. And I
Oh.
incorporated some objects in this. We used emoji that related to those things, and every Sunday for that series, I had a child open up a gift, and it had like a pillow emoji of whatever was to connect with love, joy, and hope and peace, and preach those. That I just enjoyed that a lot. And an Easter or Resurrection Sunday related series that this actually is one that Walker and I prepared together. It was a series called Playing Chess with the Devil. And we made a big chessboard prop and used some kind of moves with chess and so forth. And the idea was, God was working out his plan of salvation, and then the strategy, if you will, that God used, sort of thing. And so we had a sermon in that called The Queen's Gambit, which was the triumphal entry. It was like an opening move in chess called that. And another one was a pawn of Satan, and that was we dealt with Judas Iscariot, who was a pawn of Satan. And the Queen's Sacrifice was I think a well-known chess game. I'm not a chess player, but I learned enough for the purposes of this series. But a well-known chess game where the queen was sacrificed, and yet that was what won the game, and we compared that to Jesus. and Jesus' sacrifice. On Resurrection Sunday, we did check, and that
Yep.
was resurrection. Then we did a sermon following called Checkmate, and that was focused on the second coming and the
Oh,
resurrection of
that's
we will be
great.
raised from the dead at the second coming. That was just a favorite series that we did.
Checkmate.
Yeah.
I like it. That's great.
It is really
I
good.
I had when I was thinking through this, mine are the examples I'm going to give you are standalones, but I've got sermon series that have been really good. But one for Easter that I did, which was called I remember I had to look it up, but the title of it was "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly." And so to introduce this, it was on the resurrection of Jesus. And of course, the good is that Jesus died for us. The bad, or sorry, the good was that Jesus raised from the dead. The bad was that Jesus had to die on the cross. And the ugly was that he had to die for my sins and your sins. And that was, but anyway, so what I did to introduce this whole idea of the good, the bad, and the ugly for Resurrection Sunday was I'm a bald guy. I've got a little bit of hair on the sides right now, but typically I like to keep it, shaved all the way down. Well, in preparation for this sermon series for 2 months, I did not shave my head. And I didn't make a big deal about it. I just kind of was going along, and some people point out like, "Oh, you're getting a little hairy on top." So on Easter, I shaved my head, but I intentionally left a patch of hair behind my right ear. And what I did was I intentionally wanted to see who it was that would come up and tell me that I missed a spot. And out of that entire time, and I only had one person in the church tell me about the patch of hair I missed behind my right head, and he did it perfectly. He came up kind of because this is Easter Sunday. I'm dressed. I don't normally wear a suit. This particular day, I wore a suit. And he came up to me he says, and we had a big crowd. He says, "Hey, did you know that you missed a spot of hair back here?" And I said, "Thank you." And that's all I said. Well, anyway, the whole point of this was I was trying to show people that, wouldn't you want to be told if you had something in your life that was not up to par, if there was something that wasn't right? And so I was trying to get people to understand that, we first have to talk about the ugly, and the ugly is that you've got sin and I've got sin, and that's a problem. And that I'm telling you about this, not to make you feel bad about yourself, but to really try to help you. And so in the course of the sermon, I had our youth minister come up, and I had electric clippers there and had him shave off that little patch. And then I talked about how Jesus is the answer to your ugly problem, that he's the solution to your ugly problem. And that was, then we were able to end on the good news that he resurrected, and that means eternal, life for you and me. But that sermon was very memorable for our people, and it created a good illustration, a good opening of the good, the bad, and the ugly of why we're talking about sin and why we're talking about death, and how that all was fixed with the resurrection of Jesus, So that was really important. The second series that was on Christmas was I dressed up so after communion, this is going to sound terrible. After communion, I went behind the stage. Actually, no. This was for our Christmas Eve service. After our worship service, I went behind the stage and I dressed in a full-blown Santa Claus outfit. And I said to people, I get a lot of grief. People like to see me wear a suit for the holidays. I don't wear suits. And so I decided to dress up in a suit tonight, and dressed up in a Santa Claus suit, and came out wearing Santa Claus suit, and basically was like, the whole sermon was on why Jesus is better than Santa Claus. And that was the whole point of the sermon. And now obviously I took the beard off, took off the hat, anything would be super distracting, but I used the suit and incorporated that as part of the message. And there were a lot of comments made about that as well. Those are probably the two most memorable things that I did for Easter and for Christmas that I can think of. So, but that was that. Well, I want to be sensitive to our time here today, and I want to keep on. And I guess that the fourth question I would ask would be this: is there any caution that you would give to a preacher when it comes to holiday sermons? And maybe you're both thinking, yeah, don't dress up in Santa Claus suits for Christmas. Maybe that might be a word of caution that you might give. But let's start with you, Jamie. Is there any caution that you would give to a preacher when it comes to holiday sermons?
Yeah, just a couple things that I would say at this point. One is make sure if you want to prepare a good holiday series, Christmas series, especially with props and that sort of thing, remember to start well in advance. When you start planning, it gets here before you know it. It's amazing to me how that's happened over the years. And so make sure and start out plenty in advance. That's one thing. The other thing that I would remember just to caution about something totally different. We haven't even brought it up today, but that is remembering the fact that the holidays can be very, very difficult for some people. And even in all of our lives, as we go through different things, the holidays can be really difficult, especially if you've lost a spouse and those sorts of things. It's just important, I believe, as a preacher, maybe even as a church, to not forget that. We need to celebrate, obviously, Christmas and what it means, the birth of Christ. And Christmas is most significant. Easter Sunday's the same. It's a little bit less so, I would think. We celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, of course. But at the same time, remember that it's a hard day for some of our brothers and sisters too. And just not lose sight of that in some of the things we might say, maybe temper our comments a little bit in a way that we wouldn't if we weren't thinking about that.
That's excellent advice. Specifically thinking even Mother's Day and some things like that, where it's just
Right.
like there's people who the holidays are not a cause for celebration for a lot of people, and that can be tough. Josh, anything you'd add to that?
Well, it's interesting you talked about dressing up as Santa Claus and doing a sermon saying that Jesus is better than Santa Claus. And obviously it worked where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just caution young preachers, especially you're just starting out, be careful with how creative you get when you don't know your people well enough yet. Some churches,
That's great. Yeah.
some churches are going to,
I've been at Burnside long enough that I kind of, and people know me and I know the people, that it's kind of like they know where my heart is for Christmas. And I only did it for Christmas Eve service rather than Sunday morning, because I thought in case we do have some visitors or whatever. But Josh, even in that sermon, I was careful not to say, even though you and I both know, Jamie may not know, but Santa Claus isn't real. I was careful not to say that Santa Claus isn't real in that sermon, because there were families that were together. And I thought, in case there are, families who would teach their kids that Santa Claus, blah, blah, blah. I just said he's better, but anyway, that brings up a good point about, and I'm
yeah,
sorry if I interrupted. Continue your
no, you're
thought.
fine. So if you've been at a church less than 2 years, I would limit how far you take your creativity. Get to know your people. Some churches are just more serious than others. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
Others are more
Right.
laid back, and they're more open to creativity.
Yep.
I know in my church, I've got just an eclectic congregation. I've got the people who go with the flow, and I've got the people who they don't like it if I use contractions. I mean, it's just you got all extremes. So, know your
Yep.
audience before you get too creative. And also, don't be afraid to be plain. Just tell the story and tell people how important it is. You don't always have to
That
be creative.
That's that. And can I just piggyback off that? Because that was one of the things I was going to say. Don't beat yourself up as a preacher. Don't beat yourself up on, oh, this isn't creative enough or unique enough. Listen, how many hundreds of years have we sang the same Christmas hymns, and people like to hear those Christmas hymns every Christmas? Why? Because it's not Christmas without singing the Christmas hymns, right? So hearing the Christmas story and just being the class of Christmas. Nothing wrong with just keeping to the basics and to the truth of why Christmas is good news and why Easter and Resurrection Sunday are good news. So that was going to be one of my points, was don't beat yourself up. But
Yep.
the second thing that I was going to say concerning that and it kind of is in regards to what Jamie said, just about being sensitive. It's that you don't lose sight of the joy of those holidays for yourself. As a preacher, you can get so frustrated and discouraged. Oh, it's another Christmas sermon series. Don't lose sight of the joy of what Christmas means, and to soak it in. And that's what I've had to learn, in my ministry too, after being someplace for so long. It's like, Mark, this is a fun, there's not going to be always the same Christmas time every year after year. People are going to be, pass away, and we're going to miss out on those. And soak it in and enjoy every moment of it that you can. I have to remind myself to be joyful sometimes about Christmas and Easter and all the other holidays as well. So
Let me add to what you just said there.
yeah.
This may shock both of you. I've never done a holiday series. I've only ever done holiday sermons. So I'll preach my normal sermon series up until the Sunday before Christmas, have a Christmas sermon, and then resume right after that. And again, if you have the talent to pull off a holiday sermon series, I nod my head to you. I don't think I'd be good at it at all, so I don't do it. And you may find that as an individual preacher, if you're listening to this broadcast as a young preacher and you feel all this pressure to do a holiday sermon series because you see the preacher down the street doing that, that doesn't necessarily need to be you. In fact, I'd say one of the biggest mistakes I made in early preaching was imitating others instead of trying to figure out how God had made me to preach.
Wow. And maybe that's a great place. Unless, Jamie, there's anything else you want to say on this whole topic?
So I don't have anything else.
Well, this is where I want to end. And maybe if you're watching this and maybe you're like, man, I can really use some help or some encouragement, or maybe you've got a question about something, please reach out to us. Jamie, you want to give that email address one last time for our listeners before we close out?
Sure. Restoration Movement Conversations at MidwestMinistryTraining.com. Just spell right all that out. Restoration Movement Conversations at MidwestMinistryTraining.com.
You do such a good job with that, Jamie. Thank you.
Hey, we really hope that
glad he does it.
Yeah, I couldn't either. We hope that this has been an encouragement to you, that you've been able to smile along with us, and that maybe this has been helpful to some of you as well. But we want to encourage you to join us next time on our podcast, where Josh will be our host. And Josh, what is the topic of our conversation going to be next time?
The importance and relevance of restoration history in your church.
Okay, perfect. We hope that you'll plan to make plans to join us next time. Until then, have a great day.